Have you ever looked at the illustrations in a children's book? And I mean really looked at them? I think understandably so, we usually treat the illustrations as sort of a secondary part of the story, when really in good children's books, it's an equal partnership between the text and the illustrations. In this video, I want to give you one thing to look at in every illustration of children's books that you pick up to get you more in depth and really optimize your reading of it so that you can use it as the powerful tool that it can be for the children you're reading to. My name is Colleen Dong. I've been in education for almost a decade. I'm a mother of two. I have my master's in rhetoric, and I am just a serious lover of great literature. Today, I'm going to show you some amazing examples from the book Henny Penny and a couple of other books as well. But first, let's talk about why this is so important to begin with. So you, as the reader of the book, hold so much power for the child, who probably is just an early reader or might not even know how to read yet. And the things that you can do when you know how to read children's literature really well are essential skills that these children need at a really early age, and then you can build upon them once they have this foundation. One of the many reasons I particularly love children's literature is because it's this incredible blend between narrative and text and images and illustration, and the two coming together creates this really rich and powerful experience for the child. But this also means that it requires some sense of visual literacy on behalf of the reader, which is what I want to talk to you about today. Today, I want to talk to you about one really important aspect that you can find in the illustrations of children's literature, and it's actually really simple. We're just going to be talking about eye contact. In visual literacy, there are two labels that are put on images surrounding the concept of eye contact. The first is simply called an offer image, and this describes an image where no eye contact is given between the character or the person in the image and the viewer. Now, these images simply ask the viewer to be an observer and almost sometimes feel like an outsider. So there can be different responses, maybe one of distance, maybe one of mystery, of curiosity. But the important thing to remember for children's literature is that when we see an offer image, the child that is observing the image is meant to feel a little bit of distance. They are meant to feel like an observer of that image. The second label that we use surrounding images and eye contact is called a demand image. And in this kind of image, the character is directly looking at the viewer and is asking for that eye contact, which basically means that there's going to be some kind of connection there. There's going to be some sort of pause, some sort of relatability, some sort of emotional response to that character in the image. Now, importantly, in children's literature, when these kinds of images are used, they're used in a way that asks the reader to identify with this character in some way. Now, one of my favorite examples of this is in Quentin Blake's illustrated version of Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The very page that Charlie is introduced to the reader, the only image on that page is simply of Charlie, and Charlie is making direct eye contact with the viewer. This is meant to communicate to the reader that Charlie is your guide in this book. Charlie is the one you are meant to identify with as the reader, and Charlie is the one you're meant to have compassion for in the book. So just as a recap, an offer image is one with no eye contact that sort of just encourages the viewer to be an observer. The demand image with eye contact encourages the reader to have some sort of identification or emotional response to that illustration. So let's take a look at what offer images and demand images can look like in a picture book and how to use them really well. Now, I'm going to be using Paul Galdon's version of Henny Penny, but I would encourage you to look at your library and see what offer images and demand images you can find in the picture books that you have. Interestingly enough, the image on the cover of the book and the first illustration of the book show the title character, Henny Penny, but only in an offer image, not including any eye contact for the reader, which sort of communicates right away that the reader is meant to observe Henny Penny's story and is not meant to feel this connection to Henny Penny, which is a really important aspect of this book and something that we're going to get to more later. Now, this pattern follows. Each time that the reader is introduced to the next bird in the story, It is offer image after offer image after offer image, further communicating to the reader that they are simply meant to observe these birds and their story and their adventure, but not necessarily meant to connect with them in any way or meant to identify with them in any way. In fact, there is only one demand image in this version of the book, and it is the last illustration of the book. Finally, the reader is allowed to make eye contact with some of the characters, and it's an unlikely character. It is Mrs. Foxy Loxy and their 7 fox children. This is who the reader, and keep in mind that the intended reader of this book is a child, this is who the reader is meant to identify with. Paul Galdone has saved the important demand image for the last illustration of the book, and it is with the mother and her children. This image asks for compassion because you know what? Those foxes just ate all those birds, and this can be a really maybe unexpected or upsetting ending to the book, and the demand image softens this ending for the child. It makes it more understandable. It makes it more relatable. And because the demand image is used on this page and this page alone, it makes it that much more powerful for the child. Traditionally, the fox in these older folktales is sort of this crafty and maybe even unlikable or maybe scary character for the children, but it's his family that the child is meant to identify with. And this demand image, along with the setting and the reason that the family is being shown, sort of asks for this moment of compassion for this maybe seemingly unlikable character for the child. Because this could be an unlikable character for the child, this extension of compassion might be a little bit difficult to do, but just that act and just that practice is going to build such an important skill for their emotional and social well-being. So you can really see that these two kinds of images are used all the time in picture books. And now you can see why they can be really important as you're reading to children. But you might be asking yourself, how? How do I use these images? How do I ask these questions to draw these things out in my students or in my child? Well, don't worry, because I have made a completely free quick reference reading guide to the book Henny Penny that gives you lots of tools and questions to use as you come across illustrations like these. I also have a video series as well as some lesson plans and some activity ideas that teachers or homeschool parents can use if you would like a more in-depth look at this specific book. So I would really encourage you to take a look at some of the books in your library. See if you can find some demand and offer images and see if you can figure out what they're trying to do, what kind of impact they're trying to have on the viewer. Be sure to subscribe so you can see more videos like this in the future. And for now, go ahead and check out my video on Goodnight Moon, probably a book that you might think is a little bit boring, and I want to tell you it might actually be brilliant. So go ahead and check that out.